The world does not fit me. We root in where we have our first memories. Anyone can love the mountains. It takes a soul to love the prairies. The prairies have been torn apart. We don't know where we are from. Turkey Creek, we are broken. We are cut off. Death by suicide. Nature, where equality and justice happen. We can fight for our public lands. I am your veteran. Pain and hurt, wilder, playing in the mud, looking up at the stars, we return. Sylvan synesthesia. Synesthesia. Myth, memory, and metaphor. Nature and culture, cloth woven by mist, the beat of the monsoon, forests set on fire, colonialism silenced the drumbeat of fire. Steam engines, feeding the empire's growth, working grids, root, stem, leaves, resource. Fragrance of jasmine, leopard, iris met iris, beauty, gunshot, something breaks in the world. The fragility of beauty, different races plotted, the tourist's gaze, sacred forests enshrining the spirit, songs, stories, dance, art, and ritual, reciprocity, dynamic ecology, ecological memory, rain that makes elephants shiver, entering the trance, trade as transformation, taking up the ritual, honey. Letting language take root. I left my hometown in Uganda, unprepared, no room for being unprepared. Innocent, I felt threatened, uncharted territory, a white piece of paper, sustainability. Rupture, rapture, harm, beliefs, piercing my heart, grace becomes evident when the human will falters. I sought solace in a forest, Douglas firs, deer, black bear, tree stump, spirit spot, retreat. Use your senses. Could it be true? I reject your hell and will love people out of it. I was falling. This is what bewilderment feels like. The Douglas fir held me. I never looked back. I saw the forest on the hill where I could belong to the questions. Bewilderment. How do you write yourself into a history where you have been erased? The forest, a place where I could be at peace within my paradoxes. The heart breaks in two ways, breaking into pieces, breaking open. The wilderness of my own inner life, wonder, growing into my voice, wilderness, the space of my questions. 3 storytellers, 3 ways of knowing. Taproot. Thank you so much for bearing witness to the truth of your lives in place. Let's have a conversation. Questions, comments, stories.
So thank you to all of you. The interesting thing for me is, sorry, my voice might be a little hoarse. I haven't had some water in a little bit here, but you're all incredibly inspiring. You know, I've had the chance to know Stacy, and I wasn't quite sure what I was gonna hear tonight, and I just have to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your kindness and your generosity to share in such an elegant way, to have it relate from a heart perspective. You know, a lot of times you can hear things and have it sound smart, but you guys all did a really nice job connecting within the heart. So thank you. And I have to say, I relate with all the stories, but your particular story with never looking back is something that I wrestled with big time. I was raised very staunch Irish Catholic, and it created division because I knew in my heart something was missing. I was like, this isn't love like we talk about, right? So was it head over heart, or was it heart over head? And I was a heart person, and so I had to do the same thing and go find my solace and get my answers or my questions answered mostly through the woods and going into the forest and discovering the forest. And it's a part of what I do today for work. So I feel the pain, man. It's hard because you feel like you're letting people down, but in your heart you know what's right. So kudos for the courage.
And for your courage too.
I just want to respond really briefly to that. I've been spending a lot of time reading the first 4 Gospels, and I think, not to give you any sense of grandeur, but like your story was like an evolution of Christ, and I thought that was really beautiful. I think in any reading of the Gospel, in my understanding of the Gospel and studying of theology, I feel like you were that embodiment with that entire story. So that was really beautiful. So I think from that perspective, Big JC would have given you a high five.
I just think as, maybe not in the divinity school, as an undergraduate though, looking at anything from a spiritual perspective is just not normal, I guess you could say. A lot of the other students aren't religious and coming from a pretty heavily religious background. That was something super surprising to me. So just hearing you guys tackle this issue from a more spiritual perspective is super, super interesting from my point of view, just because I think the issue is beyond science. I read something the other day, just like the science is here. Everything we need is here. We figured out solutions. There's a way to combat a lot of the problems going on. I think it's more of a personal problem right now. And I think we need more of an attachment to nature. And I think that's just super interesting to finally see other people who agree with that, because that's not something that's really talked about a lot in the undergraduate program. It's mostly just, let's learn about these science classes, let's learn about the economics behind it, let's learn about the public policy behind it, but we don't ever talk about maybe the spiritual side to it and how these problems could be fixed through that.
What's your name again?
Rachel.
Rachel, thank you. Thank you for that. If I just quickly responding to your remarks, I spoke about religion. I could speak about any institution, and I think when it comes to these questions around planetary health, asking what conversations are we not having in the spaces is something to pay attention to. What conversations are we not having? What is taboo in this space, and how might we walk that line between what we've considered taboo and how might we blend different worlds together? Thank you.
Just to add to that, I also want to add that I think science is incredibly spiritual. In fact, I think I encountered my spirituality first through science. I mean, if it in some ways is trying to advance the work of awe and wonder, and a lot of science in the way that it's practiced may not seem that way, but like what was once the domain of philosophy is now being answered, or these questions are now being answered by science through quantum physics. It's talking about free will, and in some ways my imagination can't keep up with what science offers me. And so I wonder if there's a danger in saying, okay, now no more science and only spirituality, and whether it might not be more useful to say, let's not be dual anymore, and let's look at both worlds for what it gives us.
And I think the English language provides us the word religion, right? Religio, reattachment. And so I think that's what we're talking about. And what is that? And I think ritual it's funny when the global left love big, broad binaries, right? Because that's what it's all about. Clearly, but I mean, I think it's interesting how we oftentimes mock or feel like we're mocking religion or spirituality, and then when we talk about nature, we want to talk about reattaching to it, and we talk about the power of ritual, or even I think your presentation about forest. I can think of a lot of people who work in the timber industry that would be happy to hear that and the engagement with that, right? And so I think even what you said challenges traditional or historic notions of environmentalism in this country and what that looks like. So, and even with the science, right, and religion, I mean, if you start looking out of the cell and you go up into the universe, it expands into nothingness, right? And if you look down into a cell and keep going all the way in, it expands into nothingness. So how do we fill that space?
First of all, thank you, all three of you, and Terry, thank you. And I feel a bit like stumbling into this question. I've been listening to Tim Snyder, who's a historian from Yale, who's talking about fascism. And he's quite brilliant. And one of the things he's noticing about fascism is that in fascism, there's no future. Which is a deeply profound notion to me, that there's, if you give up the notion of future, then a lot of things become possible. So not only do you challenge the notion of truth, but you notice that you challenge the notion of future itself. And I think this generation is the first that is confronting the possibility of no future, that the planet itself is being destroyed. And I think we're having trouble getting our minds around that. And the question I think I'd like to ask you then is how each of you or any one of you feels your spiritual life helps or doesn't help you have a sense of the future. Because I think my spiritual life helps me to see a greater context. And I have a lot of despair about that, a lot of sadness about this really may be the way we end the world. And something else will happen in some other context. But the science is that we're really destroying the planet, and it's not being turned around. So how do you see a future when that's the science?
I can take that. First of all, I think any kind of spirituality, whether you come to it from science or religion, the very first thing you encounter is your own sense of scale in relation to everything else. And so it would be presumptuous, I think, with a spiritual perspective, to think that we will destroy the earth. We're just one small part of this just very, very complex, magnificent system. So to that extent, I don't fear, I don't believe that we have that kind of power to stop time itself. You know, and in some way that's very, very powerful to know that the planet has its own, it's embedded with its own restorative kind of capabilities. And I think that kind of recognition of your own scale in response to everything else is at the same time as debilitating as it is powerful, because it means that you can reverse the trend. And so for me, the thought of not having a future is not alarming at all, because I don't recognize, because we're only talking about not having a future for the human, and I don't recognize, I hope not to recognize the human as really that separate in a sense. And so if the earth continues, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Parker Palmer talks about the politics of the brokenhearted, and I like to call my spirituality, the spirituality of the brokenhearted. There is, I feel a true sense of there are moments that occur to me where I ask myself whether our species will make it, whether we'll make it to whatever is on the other side. And in my own work, particularly with youth in education environments, both in school or outside of school, there is hearing young people's stories and being present to their own moments of joy and their own moments of brokenness. And since our programs are actually happening, in the middle of a forest, for example, in the Pacific Northwest, there is a true connection that I see in their brokenness and in the brokenness in the world. And there have been multiple experiences of despair in that for me. And part of what has happened for me spending time out in the woods, whether I'm singing a song out or whether I'm walking through, I was walking in the waters of the Salish Sea in the Pacific Northwest a few years ago, and there was just this. It was a real place of trauma for me around family and gender issues, and I was walking through with a sense of numbness, and I was feeling the water just come to my feet and just paying attention to what was going on for me as I treaded the water. And all of a sudden, I got to a point where I just looked towards the depth of the water. There were boats passing by, and I just burst out into a song I do not know the meaning of. But there was just one word, which was baila, right? And in Spanish, that's the word for dance, right? But I did not know that then. But I was just singing this song, baila. But there was a certain vitality that came for me in that moment, just by paying attention to how I was connecting with the elements. And there was I very much felt like this warrior who was like, okay, this is something I've been fearing to face, but I'm going to face it. And I don't think I would have been able to do that without having that connection to the land. And so I don't think there are easy answers. A part of me doubts whether we'll make it on the other side. But another part of me is rooted in joy and gratitude and in protecting beauty that is present. And in those moments, I get a sense, I begin to celebrate what could be possible. I begin to believe in what could be possible. And I've drawn a lot from the work of Joanna Macy in that process as well.
So I had an experience this last year with my little girl, and it was bath time, right? She got out of the bath, she slipped through our hands, she's naked, she's excited, and she's running from her parents. She's having the time of her life, right? Pure stoke, right? Just little naked, slippery baby running around. And her mom and I are frustrated and angry, and we just would like to get her to bed so we could have 30 seconds to talk to each other before we fall asleep. And she's looking for the cat, and she sprints around the table, just missing her head from the table because she's this ginormous child, right? Sprints around, she knows the cat's on this little deck that we have, runs out of the deck and sees this sunset and stops short, right? She sees the sunset, she's so amazed, and it's this awe-inspiring moment, and her mom and I back up right on her, right? Because I'm charging and I don't stop very well, and I'm like, but I get caught by the awe, and her mom smashes into me, and I hop over her, and we have this moment of awe. And in that moment of kind of trying not to boot my child off the deck, I have this moment of stoke, right? And all of a sudden, this horrible event of a naked baby running free is done, right? And we have in that, and then we put her to bed, and she's happy, and we collapse into bed, and right before we turn on the British baking show, which is this generation's Bob Ross. This pure joy, right? It's pure joy and exhaustion. And the next morning, I think about that experience. And I think about my experience at war. And I think about what it is to be a father in Syria. And I think about a father and a mother sitting down, finally able to watch their child in a broken, bombed out apartment building in Aleppo. And the bomb explodes, and the kid jumps out and runs seeking for shelter, and is stopped in its tracks, in her tracks, by an explosion that she's never seen before. And she's awed in the most horrific way. And the same physical, chemical actions are happening in the body that my daughter had, from stoke to awe, and ultimately collapses in the basement of the building, asleep with exhaustion and fear and despair. And those same emotions are held, and those same feelings are held in absolute reverse of one another. So what do you do with that? How do you live in such a way as to allow yourself joy, but also to allow yourself deep pain and hurt? And I think I think part of it is not to seek the answer, right? And I've been guilty of that. You'll get healthier in the outdoors. You may not, right? But you have to hold the space, I think, for those questions. And I think figuring out how to root into as has been said, the joy and the gratitude and the beauty, and try and find ways to be awed positively. But I mean, I think it's also a beautiful thought, the restorative power of the earth. Maybe what we're experiencing right now is the earth saying, figure it out, otherwise I will. And we're going to have to mourn. We're going to have to mourn. And we're going to have to mourn people, and we're going to have to, cities will be gone, and people will be gone, but we can create new cities. We have potentially a beautiful opportunity to look more towards Abel and less towards Cain in this future. And I think but yeah, I mean, I've never made the necessary connection between erasing the future, but as I think about some of the slogans at work, it's all backwards facing. So how do we help other people experience into that? How do we help other people? I think there's a lot of people out there who feel like they're being made fun of all the time. And how do we help them to see that we're not teasing religion or spirituality, that has a role too.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this space. Thank you to each one of you, Andrew, Fatima, Stacy, this blessed community. And may we hold the questions as we begin to draw new maps together. Thank you so much for coming to the Constellation Project.